The Plein Air Easton Podcast is brought to you by the Avalon Foundation, enriching the lives of those on the Eastern Shore of Maryland through the arts. Visit avalonfoundation.org for details on events, performances, and educational programming offered throughout the year. Today's episode is sponsored by JFM Enterprises, providing distinctive ready-made and custom frames and moldings to the trade since 1974. Visit jfm.net to view their catalog of designs.
I know there had been some interest about me talking about my first experience on the Eastern Shore with the Academy of Arts.
Yeah, we definitely want to ask you.
And the funny thing is that's actually about 50 years ago, so
great. That'd be awesome.
It's not like it's a fresh memory.
No, it's not a fresh memory, but yeah, you can look at where they are today, and
it's unbelievable, the change.
Just hold, Henry. Just hold that for the interview, if you don't mind. Hi, Marie.
Hey.
It's always nice when we get pleasantly surprised with a fun podcast.
Well, I think that is your MO too, because I think you like coming in hot and like not knowing anything. 'Cause you're like, just teach me what you have about yourself. I like that perspective because I'm like, doing all this homework because I want to learn some preliminary stuff. But
well, I think you started out with the preliminary on this gentleman who we interviewed today, and if I do not want to take over the podcast, though. Am I taking over the podcast? From you? Was that?
No.
I don't want to change your train of thought.
No, not at all. I definitely can appreciate pulling a thread, especially there's so many. I get so like engrossed in the conversation. Sometimes I have to be like, hey,
right.
There's people listening and wanting to hear you ask some more questions.
We yin and yang together pretty well, then, would you say?
Yes, I do believe we do.
All right.
And I do believe that you and Jess do as well, so it's all fun.
This is Henry Coe. It's our interview with Henry Coe, coming right up.
Have a listen.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Plein Air Easton Podcast. My name is Tim Wigand, and I'm here with
Marie Nuttall.
Marie, good to have you back in the hot seat today.
Yay.
This interview we're getting ready to do. Today we are with another artist that I don't know anything about, although I love his name. I think it's like one of the coolest. There's got to be some historical reference to this gentleman's name. I feel like I've read it in history books my whole life. We are talking today with Henry Coe. Henry, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Henry.
And thanks for saying that about my name, but I think that when you compare it to like another artist's name like Wolf Kahn, it doesn't quite have the same cachet.
You'd have to be like Coyote Coe or something like that, I guess.
Right.
There's still time.
Still time. Is there an English reference that I'm jogging? Your name is jogging in my mind. Do you know anything about the history of the Coe name?
Yeah, it's not actually all that great, but I think if you go way back in English history, the Coe name is synonymous with the name Cook. We did have a family crest which consisted of cuckoo birds. I'm not sure how that came about. I also know that this might be one reason why you know of it, there's a Henry Coe State Park in California.
No kidding.
Which unfortunately I have no connection with whatsoever.
I knew there was something.
You should just claim it anyway.
We're going to look up Henry Coe State Park and see what that guy got, how he got a state park. And this Henry Coe didn't.
What'd he do?
Anyway, Henry, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Where do we want to start? What I'm really interested in, Henry, is can you tell us about artist residency and what that entails? I was peeping at your website and see that you have artist residencies in China and at least 3 in France. What does that entail?
Well, the first one, the one in China, which was in 1982 and 1983 and actually lasted for 7 months, I actually wasn't sure what to call it. I don't know whether it would really be called a residency. It actually involved Harry Hughes was the governor of Maryland at the time, and he developed a sister state relationship with a province in China, Anhui Province. And they really wanted to invite someone over to spend 6 or 7 months there painting. I happened to be in the right place at the right time.
Wow.
And they asked me to do it. And so, of course, I jumped at the chance. And it was really a terrific experience. I traveled through a lot of parts in Anhui and in other parts of China. And then when I left China, I spent 5 months traveling through Southeast Asia. So I spent about a year away painting in Asia. Really good experience. But
Wow.
the other 3 that occurred in France were, I think, more typical residencies. The first one was one that was actually set up by Maryland Institute in connection with a woman named Elizabeth Klotz, whose husband was Trafford Klotz. He was a fairly well-known Maryland painter of the 20th century, and he had a chateau in Brittany. And she wanted to find a way to maintain the chateau, so she connected up with the Institute and started inviting artists over. And I went over there with a couple of other artists and painted for 2 months. That was terrific, too. And while there, she told me about a French residency that was in another part of Brittany. And I applied to that, ended up doing it twice, and also at the same time got to know a family that had a couple of little houses for rent and sort of set up a relationship with them. And I would go back every year, and I still have art supplies over there. They keep my easel and a bunch of other things, and whenever I want to come back, it's fine with them.
That makes it easy to travel. That's good. You don't have to pack up anything. You just hop in the plane.
Well,
and
yeah,
especially all those
really
cumbersome
made a
things.
huge difference after a while, because when you're carting all your supplies over there, it's gets to be a big hassle. So being able to keep stuff there, it's like having a little studio over there. And I unfortunately haven't been there for several years because as my kids have grown, I have felt too guilty to go over there by myself. So we were actually all set to make a trip right before the pandemic hit. And we had gotten tickets, they had passports, the whole family of 5 was going to go. And then the pandemic hit and we had to cancel. So hopefully we'll still get to go over there because they sure want to go. By the time they get to go, they might be middle-aged, though.
Well, Henry, how long have you been? I mean, it sounds like you've been. I know we're going to talk about the Academy Art Museum and a story you have from 50 years ago, but you've been painting your whole life.
Yeah, I have. I mean, I always liked to draw when I was a kid. When I went to college, I majored in English, but I minored in art. This was in Virginia. And my art teacher, she knew a guy who lived in the mountains outside of Roanoke named George Solanovich. He was a Russian painter, illustrator. And she used to take us to this incredible house he had up in the mountains. And we used to have art classes there. And he was a master technician. I think he even illustrated for Disney. He had these fantastic techniques that were, really eye-opening to me. Were just things I hadn't seen.
Like what? What would be? I mean, if you could, I don't want you to.
Well, it's a technique you still see today, and actually see it quite widely used. It's basically called a pull-off technique, where you put on a fairly light kind of medium heavy solution of paint onto the canvas, and then you use a very sharp instrument, like a very fine sharp brush or other instrument, to pull the paint off and create your highlights. And it's just a very interesting way of working, which I sort of over the years kind of would come back to, incorporate it and somewhat into my own painting.
Now, when you say you always like to draw, when you were younger, was there something that so you're sitting around, and you're going to draw something, and I always start with a 3D box. if I'm in a meeting and I love to draw and like doodle around, but I always start with the same thing. It's always a 3D box. It's the only thing I can think that actually looks three-dimensional, which I like. And then it turns into circles, and I make faces in it. And did you doodle around like that? Did you ever start with one thing? And then sort of like progress.
Well, I think probably at about the age 12, I was fairly obsessed with old cars, so I drew those all the time.
Uh-huh.
First, I just drew them in profile because I didn't have any understanding of perspective. But eventually I started to turn them a little bit to make them a little more three-dimensional. But then after that, I actually just got interested in drawing faces, and I would copy any face out of a magazine or a newspaper. And really continued with an interest in that for a long time. And actually both my parents, my mother used to do watercolors, and she was, they were kind of small, very simple things, but they were well done. Mm-hmm. And I think that had some influence on me. My father started out wanting to be an architect, but switched to something else. But he did have a drawing ability that was, I think influential also. But after I majored in English in college, I decided I wanted to have more to do with art. So I got into Maryland Institute and started taking graduate courses, and eventually got a graduate degree from them, and then wound up on the Eastern Shore.
That's wonderful. That's great. Again, we've talked to a lot of people who started out as graphic designers or architects, that type of thing. So it's always interesting to hear when somebody went kind of straight at it. And then the question that Jess would ask would be like, was it a success for you when you first started?
No, I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, the Institute had an employment service, which I went to, and that's where I discovered about the job at the Academy of Arts. And
I know we're talking about the Academy of Arts here in Easton.
In Easton, that's what it was called, the Academy of Arts.
Right.
And so I came down here and they hired me at the breathtaking sum of $7,000 a year, which
that's good money.
Wow,
hey, that's
incredible. I never even conceived of so much money.
Henry, what was what was your title?
I was curator.
Ooh,
nice.
And I was the second curator. The first curator was a guy named Wayne Neild, and fortunately he was still living in the area and he helped me out a lot. But I taught some classes and I taught courses at Chesapeake College. But unfortunately, I really had no idea what I was doing because I really was just learning how to paint. But it was on the Eastern Shore where I started to paint landscapes and realized that the Eastern Shore to me was like a Dutch painting, the traditional Dutch painting, which has a low horizon and about 3/5 sky, was what I saw all around me, and that started really appealing to me. So,
how long were you at the Academy?
Not that long. I guess.
What years? What
72. Year? I came down in the summer of 72.
Mm-hmm.
They hired me. I moved down. And then sometime in 74, I quit. I kept on teaching for a while, but I really wanted to try to concentrate on my own painting. So I stayed on the Eastern Shore for 10 or 12 years and just worked a lot of different odd jobs.
You came by the Avalon back in the day and that sort of thing.
Right.
Did you hang out at Carpenter Street in St. Michael's?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. And there were a few other places too in St. Michael's to hang out.
Right. Well, that's great. So then you came back and you found. Were you surprised? 18 years ago when you heard about Plein Air Easton, the painting competition that we do here.
That's another interesting. I hadn't done any plein air competitions, and I knew about Plein Air Easton. And as a matter of fact, one time I was doing a painting in Roxana, Delaware, a big painting, and a woman came by and stopped, and she said, "You should take that over to Plein Air Easton and enter it," And I thought, well, they probably wouldn't accept, me just walking in and entering the painting. So I doubt I can do that. But it really took a long time before I finally applied. The first time was 2016, and I was lucky enough to get in. But the reason I did was because, I don't know if you've heard of Gary Pendleton's book, 100 plein air painters in the Mid-Atlantic region.
No, I haven't heard of that.
I'll have to look
I
that
was
up.
in that book, and I met a lot of the other people who were in that book, and a lot of them were plein air painters who went into these competitions. So that made me decide to try it. And I'm glad I have, because it's turned out to be a situation in which you can really sharpen your skills and meet a lot of terrific artists.
And we're going to ask a couple more questions before we go to break here real quick. But
Yeah, so wait, Henry, can I just go back to like that time frame between your Academy art gig and was plein air even a thing back then? I mean, were
yes.
artists like hanging out outside and
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
it was a thing, and people were doing it. The classes I taught at the Academy, people wanted to go outside and paint. And the
nice.
Academy, which I really thought of as not much more than an art club, with their own little private collection of paintings, there were a lot of artists there who were, they were good painters, and they were going out and painting,
so then you come back in 2016, and then you could talk the changes in the town were. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I could still see small town Easton, and I could still see, the sort of that beautiful thing of the various little towns, Oxford, St. Michael's, Tillman Island. But at the same time, it had just grown so much. Everything was grown.
Right.
Everything was developed. And
I love it here. Absolutely love it here. And the big thing because I got here in '86, and one of the big things, probably right around the time you were leaving, you'd just been gone a couple of years, but the trees grew in town. Like if it's really tree lined now, and like I don't remember when they.
Except now they're taking them all down.
Yeah, now because they're up
because they're too big.
Yeah, they're uplifting the sewer, water and electric lines.
that's why they're doing so well.
Right. Yeah, right. So Henry, we're gonna take a break after this question. What is plein air to you? You sound like you were into it early. This came to us 18 or 19 years ago. And maybe there were people over at the Academy at that time even who were painting on plein air, but we were new to it. What does plein air mean to you in terms of its broad, tight definition, whatever? What to you, as someone who's done it for a long, long time?
Yeah, I have. I mean, it's always been the thing that's most attracted me to painting, because it's the easiest way to directly deal with the changing light of any given time. If you're working from a photograph, it's totally static, and the decisions are kind of already made for you. If a plein air painting to me is when you're outside and you have to deal with all of those changes in a very immediate sense. The sun's going down, the clouds are changing, the wind's blowing, bugs are getting in the painting, people are coming up and talking. All these different things are going on, and they're forcing you to make decisions really quickly. Like if I try to do a painting in the studio, I can sit in a chair in front of it for 6 hours and not do anything, Mm-hmm. But when you're out there and it's all happening right in front of you, you have to make those decisions immediately. And I think basically that's a good thing.
So are you an artist that will revisit the same space over and over again, or because of those factors, that's not really how you best approach a painting?
You mean the same subject matter?
Right, like there's a tree behind you. Like, will you go back and visit that tree, like hang it up next day, or in your mind, are you thinking, well, there's no way the clouds are going to be anywhere near it, or even if you went at the same time? I mean, like you said, the sky can be incredibly different from day to day.
Well, because I like to paint fairly large, for a long time I was painting outside, doing paintings that were about 4 feet by 6 feet. I would start by making a small painting, the same ratio of sizes, and get some idea for the sky. And then I would start the big painting and come back every day at the same time. And yes, sometimes the weather wasn't the same, but sometimes you get lucky. You might have a string of 4 or 5 days in a row that were the same. And that's the way I would work it. And then I would use the sky study in the studio if I had to, adjust things. But a lot of times, I would end up painting whatever the sky was at the time. becomes a dialogue where you're making marks on the canvas and things are happening to you at the same time. And it's kind of a give and take that you try to keep up with.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to say the hard thing, you do at some point have to bring it back inside and look at it, because outside you're dealing with the glare of the sun, light and shade and glare coming across the painting. And after a while, I find, especially now that I'm getting older, I can't really see it anymore. I have to bring it back in and just look at it to see what I'm doing.
Is there a time of year that you prefer over other times? Like, I know sometimes in the middle of the summer, like the sky can just be a weird shade of sort of gray for it's, it's not like the sun is out, but it's so humid and thick and the air is just thick outside that it's just not clear. It's not like San Diego's clear sky.
Right.
So is there a time of year that the sky is better for you?
Well, I love the fall and the winter. I'd say that November and December, the sun has gone really far south. The shadows are really, really long. Mm-hmm. The sun doesn't get up that far north, so the shadows are long and they're dark. And I really love that period because everything is so clearly delineated. But yeah, I think a sky that's got activity in it with clouds, and there's nothing like an oncoming storm to paint in.
Yeah.
Probably is you get caught out in it, which has happened plenty of times. But it certainly makes for an interesting subject. But yeah, I know what you're talking about, Marie, with that kind of, it's almost like a yellowish white light, and there's nothing else.
Right.
With just the grayness over everything.
Yeah.
Well,
it's very hard to paint.
In our defense, in San Diego, you would only see blue all the time. So
I know, but sometimes I miss the blue.
We get plenty of blue around here. Again, if you're dealing with your realtor, we get plenty of blue around here as well. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with a delightful conversation with Henry Coe. Just 1 second.
The 18th Annual Plein Air Easton Competition and Festival takes place July 17th through the 24th, 2022, when 58 of the top plein air artists of our time will spend 1 week in Easton, Maryland, competing for thousands of dollars in prizes. Immerse yourself in a week of art exhibits, receptions, free demos, and panel discussions. Purchase exceptional and brand new art for that blank wall. Come for the art and make your summer memories at Plein Air Easton. The full event schedule can be found online at pleinaireaston.com.
Thank you all for joining us again. Marie, I think you have a very interesting question that you want to start off, Henry, with here.
Yes, I want to know, because you have such an extensive career, Henry, and like that liaison between plein air painting, back in the early academy days when you were there, and then today's like competitive painting. Was that notion of painting competitively just so off the wall, or like how did people that were professional artists view this onslaught of, hey, now we're gonna like all compete against each other?
Well, I think I'd have to say that I slightly lied earlier, because the first plein air event of mine wasn't 2016. It was actually back when I lived on the Eastern Shore, and there was a painting competition at the Maritime Museum in St. Michael's.
Oh, see, there you go.
And I entered that, and I think even won a prize, but that was probably the first actual plein air event.
And there were goodness.
Quite a few paint. No, I mean, for me.
We've got to rewrite history.
Well, we'll have to do some digging and find out.
But I do think I would say something about the competition thing. I mean, I can remember in 2016 hearing a lot of people talk about plein air painting as the new golf. And I just thought, whoa, no, it's not a sport. It may be a competition, but this is not a sport. This is something totally different. And I think it's kind of a disservice to when you look at the really good painters who were putting themselves out there and doing it. It's really a pretty serious thing. And I'm amazed at some of the work that some people are able to come up with, not just in plein air competitions, but in a 2-hour quick draw.
Yeah.
It usually takes me a lot more time than that to come up with, anything decent. So.
Do you participate in the quick draws?
I do, but I think I've done one quick draw in which I won a second prize, and that's it. Because usually 2 hours usually just isn't enough.
It's not
I
your
need about 3 hours,
Gotcha.
really to get something going.
Right.
I think the golf comparison was just because it was so hot and you were out in it. And then I think also it had something to do with George W. Bush and how he had made a comment that he didn't take up golf when he retired from the presidency, that he took up painting. And I think that was a weak sort of metaphor that people were kind of using back then. But
and now he paints in the shower, so maybe
Yikes.
maybe that's the new place for plein air painting.
he's painting in the shower? Is that
Wow.
Yeah, he has done paintings in the shower.
Well, I guess if you're
no.
president, there's nowhere else to go but paintings in the shower, maybe. I don't know.
I can't unimagine that.
I restrict myself to singing in the shower. Not
Yeah,
painting.
you're sticking to singing. I want to go back to this thing where you talk about like it's a dialogue between you and the painting or whatever.
Right, right.
What
I'd be happy to talk about that.
Yeah, what do you?
Well, I mean, to me, this is what has always amazed me about painting. You start out with a blank canvas. I mean, you can have a 4 by 6 foot canvas, just a blank white space, and you can put one dab of paint on it, and that changes everything. The dialogue actually starts right there, because just making that one dab of paint, you've completely altered that surface.
Okay.
Things are starting to happen. You can put another color next to it or the same color, and things begin to happen. I find this to be very true in plein air painting, particularly when I'm working outside. And it's probably one of the things that really excites me the most is that I can take a large canvas outside, it's completely blank, and eventually I'm going to have something on it that's a whole image that exists in and of itself, outside of the subject that I painted. Because once you take it away from that subject, to me, it's got nothing to do with the subject. It exists on its own. And that's what's so great about it. And the whole way of getting there is the conversation. You may start out with a particular thing that you want. And this is one of the problems of painting to me, is that I can spend too much time driving around because I have an idea in my head of what I want to put on the canvas. And so I'm looking for it.
Right.
And that almost never succeeds. It just becomes a big driving waste of time. It's best to be open to what's out there and say, okay, that's a possibility. Stop and set up and start working with that, So there's a back and forth constantly, that just starts with a plain white surface.
So I'm going to turn this conversation a little bit. We are doing a play right now, and I talk to the actors about this all the time, where, it's really about the questions that you're going to ask yourself in the meantime between rehearsals that are going to shape what you're going to do at the rehearsal time. Acting is a lot about so many questions about what you're trying to, you have a vision in your head of how you want to play something on stage. And there's a technique with how to get there. You have to learn how to hold the brush. You have to learn how to mix paint. You have to learn how to do those things. But where you're really going to put the performance out is the stuff that you do when you're just thinking about the character and why the character says this, because and what were they doing before they got into the scene that you're actually watching, and those are the questions, everything that you can think about, possibly like why this person is in this situation. Right. Is that the dialogue that you're talking about, sort of going on with yourself, and do you get frustrated in it still?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think it's that, and it's also the dynamic that would exist depending on who the other actors are. Like if another person is playing a particular part, how is that going to affect the part you're playing? It's
Right.
the same way with the dynamic of the elements of a landscape.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
How am I gonna just paint exactly what I see, or am I gonna take something out and put something in, move something over, rearrange it?
And
They're all questions that come up. I'm sorry.
Is the goal to convey that conversation, that discussion to the buyer? Is it okay for them to have a different
absolutely
discussion with the painting?
Absolutely, totally. Yeah, I would encourage that. I mean, if somebody comes up and just says to me, well, that painting gives me a really good feeling, that's all I need.
Right.
That's all I'm looking for. Now, if somebody buys it, that's great, but it's just the satisfaction that it means something to somebody, but it doesn't have to mean the same thing.
Right. It resonated with them on some
it's
level.
Like a painter that I like, a lot of people like, is Edward Hopper. And Hopper said that he just wanted to paint the light on the side of a house. And I think that's an amazing comment. It just, it's just a physical thing. He's going to learn how to paint light and shadow on the side of a house, and that's it. But when you look at his paintings, there's so much more there than that. There's a whole feeling of the isolation of people in early 20th century America, and all that's coming out just because Hopper wanted to go paint the light on the side of a house. Right. And you can see that. You see those late afternoon light and shadow on the side of some clapboard house in New England. It evokes a tremendous feeling. That's what he's getting at. He never talked about it.
Who else inspires you, Henry?
Well, another contemporary of his, Charles Birchfield, who I think also Hopper really liked as a painter because Hopper wrote about him. His work started out somewhat along the lines of this kind of isolated Depression era feeling of 20th century America, but then he kind of went off into a tangent that kind of celebrated a sort of fantasy of nature. It completely changed, and he did it all in watercolor. But yeah, he's a really interesting painter.
How many paintings have you made, Henry?
How many?
Yeah, 7,000.
I have no idea.
10,000, 20,000 paintings. You
still
love it?
Oh yeah.
Why do you love it? You're meant to do it, obviously.
I don't exactly know why I love it. I just know that when I'm doing it, I feel like I'm doing what I should be doing. Mm-hmm. It used to be a long time ago, I felt like I would go outside and paint because it was a way to participate in the day. I wouldn't be sitting inside not doing anything and not knowing what the day was like outside. I'd be outside and the sun would be going over, the shadows would be getting longer, and I'd be out there in it. And that was all I had to do, And I think it's always sort of stemmed from something like that.
Right. And Henry, if Edward Hopper said, I was just trying to paint the light on the side of a house.
Yeah, well, he said that's all he really wanted to do.
If you were to say what Henry Coe, all he really wanted to do, what would Henry Coe say?
I don't know. As soon as I said it, I would say, no, that's not it. But
right.
I think it's very hard to be pinned down. But I think I want, I don't need to be painting the Rockies. I don't need to paint the Grand Canyon. I'd rather paint the sort of day-to-day things one sees in the rural America that surrounds me. But within that rural America, I'd like to find a little bit of mystery,
How do you do that in a paint? How do you do that?
I think you do it with the light. I think all of us painters, especially plein air painters, we're chasing the light. It is in the light. It's in the light and the shadow, And the one thing with going to France and painting, I think the one thing that was brought home to me there about the Impressionists and people before the Impressionists like Charles D'Aubigny and Camille Corot, it's not just that they were painting the light, they were painting the actual air between themselves and the object they were looking at. So they were kind of painting the light in the space between them and the things they were painting.
Wow.
That's like what Monet is trying to do when he's painting haystacks and cathedrals, It's like not the object itself, but the space between them and all that light coming through there. It's just a way of seeing. And I felt like, I don't know whether this is the case in France, but I felt like the atmosphere was more palpable, Like it was more, you could almost feel it a lot,
Kind of like Easton in July, Henry. Doesn't it feel like you can kind of feel the air? It's so heavy.
Well, yeah, you wear the air in Easton.
It's like Maine is another place I love to paint. You can go up to Maine and it can be foggy and misty, and you can practically reach out and hold the air. Mm-hmm. It's so thick. But you can also have those days in Maine where you can be looking at islands that seem to be a mile away, but they're so dark and crystal clear. It's like they're right in front of you. It's like you can't see the air between because it's so clear. The sky is an incredible blue. I find those different things really fascinating.
But painting the air has a
Yeah,
long way from making a 3D box. I'll say that much. I mean, it really is. It is wonderful to talk to you artists, the artists that come on the show, and to eventually see the work. Like we're seeing now in your background, and throughout the festival and throughout the year, how you do what you do, and painting the air. I mean, I could go into I know there's a technique for that, right? I mean, I know we were talking to the guy who I think won an award last year, who said he bought a particular type of paint and oil to get the shine off of the water, and he'd been trying to do it he'd been working on it for a year or so, trying to do that. I mean, is trying to paint the air a hard? I mean, you're not just painting blue, right? I mean,
no, you're not. Well, you really have to think in terms of the space between things, the space
depth
between, the position you're in and what you're viewing, whether it's, aerial perspective, which refers to things that are far away that you're going to sort of diffuse and soften. They're not going to have any hard edges. They're going to have very soft edges. And then as you come into the foreground, the optics are going to be more clearly defined and less diffuse. It brings up another painter, a 19th century American painter that I've liked the whole period I've been painting, and that's George Innis, who was really a master of the edges of things, of when to show an edge and when to lose it in the things around it. And he was a master of the light and shadow, the late afternoon light that falls across a landscape and creates these areas where suddenly something pops out quite clearly, like a figure in the distance. But then another thing farther back, maybe it's a cow, maybe it's another figure, you can't really tell, because that's really the way we see things. We're not seeing everything in all this detail. That's, to me, is one of the problems with painting from photographs. Everything is too clear, but we don't, when we're looking at a landscape, we don't see it that way.
Right. And yet there still is sort of an awe comes about me sometimes, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, when you see something that is painted, oh my God, it looks like a picture. So I get that side of it too. But again, that is not exactly what plein air is about, correct?
Correct, yeah. Although, there are people who there's a painter named Rackstraw Downs who paints in New York and Texas, and he's an English painter. He's been in this country for a long time. He paints large landscapes outside in the city that he'll spend months on. Mm. And if you look at them, like some people say, wow, that's incredibly photographic, but it's more than that. It's almost hyper realistic. Mm-hmm. They're just incredibly intricate and really quite amazing.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, I think there's room for everything in painting. It's just that for me, I like the kind of, the effects that soften and harden and kind of change back and forth as they recede into the distance.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I think I do too. I like the suggestion of, a cow rather than the highly detailed. If you get really close to it, then you're like, I'm not really sure what that is, but you step away and you're like, whoa, that is really cool.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, I love when you can go you see, like some paintings are meant to be down a long hallway, and you're like, oh wow, it looks incredible, and it changes as you get closer. I really like the concept you were talking about, like, well, once you take a palette or a board or whatever you paint on, or your canvas, and you put one dot in the center of it, it's all changed. That's really, really interesting, too, as well. So, Henry, we're getting ready to go with rapid fire here. This is our rapid fire section.
First thing that comes to mind, Henry.
First thing that comes. This is Marie's little.
Is this kind of like Stephen Colbert questionnaire thing?
Yeah. You could. Yeah, take your time with it. Yes, you could. Yes.
You're going to ask me what my favorite sandwich is?
What's your favorite sandwich, Henry?
Oh, that would be. I'd say grilled haddock sandwich. You get it up at a little place in Maine.
Nice.
But I won't mention it because it'll be flooded with people.
That's not something you'd find around here. Henry, first thing that comes to your mind if I say the term overrated?
Oh, God. Boy.
You're thinking about it too much.
No, that's good.
I've obviously thought about it way too much.
He's auditioning for the Colbert Show.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be art related. It can be, social media or,
Well, that's what I was thinking.
I don't want to feed
media.
Social media.
I would say the internet, too. Oh, I know what I would say. Information.
Yeah, how so?
Well, we get too much of it. And a lot of it's not real.
Right.
We get it on the internet. You can get all sorts of information that isn't real. I'm constantly telling this to my kids.
Is it real? Is it true? Is it necessary?
Son, that's not real.
I mean, when my kids are looking at YouTube videos and thinking this person has 1 million followers, so they must be credible.
Overrated.
Not necessarily
overrated.
Totally overrated.
You hear that, Zuckerberg?
We talked about your season. Tell us a chore that you despise.
I would rather you ask me a chore that I like.
What chore do you like?
Well, you can hate
Chopping
on chores.
wood.
I mean,
I'm sorry. What do you like?
Chopping wood.
Chopping wood. You like chopping wood. Okay, so go the opposite of that. That would be one you hate.
Cleaning out a bathroom.
That's a good one. That's a good one, Henry. That's a good one.
My wife's not going to like hearing that.
Tell us one person you would love to meet at a dinner party, deceased or alive.
Charles Dickens.
Oh, not the painter.
No,
There is a Plein Air painter.
Remember, I was an English major in college.
Okay.
What's your favorite Dickens? I've done Christmas Carol here about 15 times here.
Uh-huh.
I love it, and I've never really read anything else by him. I mean, I'm not a well-read person. What do you love about Dickens?
For one thing, he has a great sense of humor, which to me goes a long way in any book. He's an excellent writer. If you look at the descriptions of his scenes, like in the early part of Tale of Two Cities, it's like he's presaging the camera, motion pictures. Mm-hmm. He's describing a carriage going through the mud on a rainy night, and it's so vivid, you could picture it in a movie. And I think a lot of early directors probably looked at this stuff and set up their shots that way.
Right.
Oh, that's very cool.
What's next, Marie?
Are you more an optimist or a realist?
I don't know. If I was a realist, I probably would never have decided to become an artist. But
Right, yeah.
Would you rather invest in a dream home or travel the world?
Travel the world, definitely.
That's my guy.
Henry, it's been great talking to you. We really appreciate you coming on.
Well, it's been really fun.
Was it as bad as you thought it was going to be?
We didn't torture you too badly, did we?
No, I thought it was great. It was a lot less painful than I thought it would be.
Good. Well, we hope you all have enjoyed this session to this podcast with Henry Coe. It's been great getting to know you, Henry. Like I said, we see people around, but we never really get to talk to them much during the festival. So that's been a real treat for us to be able to do that throughout the last probably 10 or 15 podcasts we've done.
What is your, tell the listeners your website, Henry, so they can learn more.
It's just henryco.com.
Not to be confused with the henrycostatepark.com.
Right. Well, if they want to get that domain, they're going to have to pay.
They're going to have to pay big bucks.
Right. Henry, thank you very much. We'll talk to you again. We'll see you soon.
Talking to you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Henry.
The Plein Air Easton Podcast is brought to you by the Avalon Foundation and was produced by Nick Richards. Our theme music was generously provided by Blue Dot Sessions. Remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. You can learn more about Plein Air Easton at pleinaireaston.com.